In the quiet plains of 1940s Kansas, life seemed simple and predictable. The Carter family, John and Mary, lived in a modest farmhouse surrounded by golden fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. But their peaceful lives would soon be upended by their daughter, Emily, whose story would become one of the most chilling cases of reincarnation ever recorded. It all began on a crisp autumn evening. The golden hues of the setting sun bathed the landscape, casting long shadows that crept closer to the Carter farmhouse. Inside, the family was gathered in the cozy warmth of their living room, the soft crackle of the fireplace blending with the hum of an old radio. Emily, their only child, sat quietly at the table, sketching something with intense focus. Her parents didn't think much of it at first, but what Emily would reveal that night would haunt them forever. As the evening deepened, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, drawing Mary's attention. She glanced at her daughter, who seemed entirely unfazed, her small hand moving the pencil across the paper with precision. Curiosity got the better of her, and Mary rose to peer over Emily's shoulder. What she saw made her blood run cold, a series of intricate hieroglyphs, eerily detailed and far beyond what a 6-year-old could conjure. John, sensing Mary's unease, approached. "What's wrong?" he asked, but his voice faltered as he, too, took in the drawings. Emily looked up at her parents, her face calm, but her eyes filled with an unsettling depth. "Do you like it?" she asked softly. It was then that she said the words that would change their lives forever. "This is from my old home. I lived in Egypt before." Emily was just 6 years old when the first crack in their normal life appeared. It was an ordinary day when she walked up to her mother, tugged on her sleeve, and said with an unsettling certainty, "I lived in Egypt before. I miss my old home." Mary froze, her heart skipping a beat. Emily's tone was not that of a child spinning a fanciful tale, but of someone recounting a deeply felt truth. John, overhearing from the kitchen, laughed nervously and brushed it off. "Kids say the strangest things," he said. But the look in Emily's eyes, a mix of longing and conviction, was something they couldn't shake. Over the following days, Emily's remarks became even more specific. She spoke of a grand river cutting through golden sands, of towering stone structures that glittered under the sun, and of a palace where she claimed to have lived. Her words painted a vivid picture of ancient Egypt, a world she could not have known at her age. At night, Emily's dreams began to trouble her. She would wake up screaming, talking about shadows and chants in a language neither parent could recognize. Her cries, filled with desperation, echoed through the farmhouse, leaving her parents unnerved and grasping for answers. At first, her parents dismissed Emily's claims as nothing more than childish imagination. They assumed her fascination with pyramids and Egyptology documentaries was merely a phase, a result of her overactive imagination. But soon, her behavior became impossible to ignore. The spark of curiosity turned into something far more eerie. Emily would sit for hours at a time, meticulously drawing strange symbols and intricate hieroglyphs. These weren't the clumsy doodles of a child. They were precise, deliberate, and hauntingly accurate. Pages upon pages were filled with her sketches, each one more complex than the last. Her parents couldn't understand where she had learned such things. When questioned, Emily would simply look up with an expression that sent chills down their spines and say, "I just know." One night, Mary crept into the dimly lit living room and found Emily sitting cross-legged on the floor. Surrounded by her drawings, the room felt heavy, the air charged with an unexplainable energy. Emily's eyes were distant, her pencil moving almost mechanically across the page. "Emily," Mary called softly, but there was no response. When Emily finally looked up, her voice was calm but unsettling. "This is who I am," she whispered, gesturing to the hieroglyphs scattered around her. John tried to reason with himself, convincing himself that it was all a coincidence. Yet the symbols Emily drew were undeniable. They matched hieroglyphs found in ancient tombs, symbols she could not possibly have seen before. The precision, the haunting confidence, it was as if she were channeling something, or someone, beyond this world. As weeks turned into months, Emily's behavior grew stranger. Her obsession with ancient Egypt deepened, consuming her every waking moment. She no longer played with toys or watched cartoons like other children her age. Instead, she spent her days poring over books on Egyptology, tracing hieroglyphs in the air with her fingers and whispering names that no one recognized. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Emily broke the silence with an unsettling declaration. "I need to go back," she said, her voice devoid of any childish innocence. John and Mary exchanged uneasy glances. "Back where, sweetheart?" Mary asked cautiously. Emily stared directly at her mother, her eyes unnervingly intense. "To my home," she said firmly. "To Egypt." John tried to laugh it off, suggesting they all needed a break from her obsession. But as the days passed, Emily's insistence only grew. She began packing her belongings, as if preparing for an imminent journey. She even marked a map of Egypt, circling locations with eerie precision, places she could not have possibly known. Then came the dreams. Night after night, Emily would wake up screaming, her voice echoing with words in an ancient tongue. When her parents rushed to her room, they would find her drenched in sweat, her eyes wide with terror. "The sand, the tomb, it's calling me," she would sob, clutching her drawings tightly. When Emily turned 8, her parents decided to take her to Egypt, hoping that seeing the land she described so vividly might provide some closure, or perhaps some answers. The journey itself was uneventful, but as the plane descended over Cairo, Emily's demeanor changed. She leaned against the window, her wide eyes soaking in the sprawling city below. Her expression wasn't just awe, it was a haunting familiarity, as though she was greeting an old friend. "It's just like I remember," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. John and Mary exchanged uneasy glances, their attempts to rationalize her words faltering. The streets of Cairo buzzed with life. Vendors called out from colorful market stalls. The air was thick with the scent of spices, grilled meats, and blooming jasmine. Yet Emily moved through it all as if on autopilot, her steps sure and steady. She didn't hesitate at crossroads or pause to take in the sights. It was as if she had walked these streets 1,000 times before. "How do you know where you're going?" Mary asked nervously, struggling to keep up. Emily didn't even glance back. "I just know," she replied, her tone calm but unnervingly certain. As they wove through the labyrinthine alleys of the old city, Emily suddenly stopped. She stood in front of an unremarkable weathered building with faded carvings etched into its stone walls. Placing her hand on the ancient surface, she whispered, "This was sacred once." Her voice carried an almost reverent sadness that made her parents shiver. The following day, they visited the Giza Plateau. The Great Pyramid loomed before them, colossal and timeless. While most tourists were content to snap photos, Emily was transfixed. She approached the structure slowly, as if walking toward a long-lost home. "I've been here before," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Her parents trailed behind her, their unease now palpable. Without waiting for the guide, Emily entered the pyramid. She navigated its dimly lit corridors with unnerving confidence, her fingers brushing against the stone walls as if they could guide her. Each step took them deeper into the labyrinth, where the air grew heavier and the silence more oppressive. "We shouldn't be here," John whispered to Mary, but his wife only nodded, too afraid to speak. Finally, Emily stopped in front of a hidden door. She traced the edges of the stone with delicate precision, her fingers trembling slightly. "This is where it happened," she whispered. The guide, skeptical but intrigued, helped push the heavy door open, revealing a sealed chamber. The air inside was thick with the scent of ancient dust and stone. In the center of the room stood a sarcophagus, its surface gleaming faintly under the flickering light of their torches. Emily stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. Her fingers hovered over the hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus. "This is my name," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and certainty. Her words hung in the air like a curse. Before anyone could respond, Emily began to recite the inscriptions aloud. The ancient language rolled off her tongue effortlessly, her voice echoing off the chamber walls. The hieroglyphs began to glow faintly, as if awakened by her presence. Panic set in among the group. The guide urged them to leave immediately, but Emily seemed rooted to the spot, her gaze locked on the sarcophagus. "This is where I belong," she whispered. It took all of her parents' strength to pull her away. The moment they left the chamber, the glow subsided, but the sense of unease lingered. Outside the pyramid, the bright desert sun seemed almost cruel in its indifference to what had just occurred. The incident in the pyramid left an indelible mark on Emily and her family. After their return home, Emily became more withdrawn, her dreams more vivid. She often woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, muttering words in a language her parents couldn't understand. The hieroglyphs she once sketched absent-mindedly now appeared more frequently, covering the pages of her notebooks in intricate detail. "This isn't just imagination," Mary whispered to John one evening as they flipped through Emily's drawings. Each symbol seemed deliberate, almost as if it had been carefully transcribed. Something, or someone, is guiding her. Emily, however, was no longer frightened by the dreams. If anything, she seemed drawn to them. "They're not nightmares," she explained one day. "They're memories. I'm remembering who I was." Her parents didn't know how to respond, but Emily seemed at peace, even as the events around her grew stranger. One particularly stormy night, Emily woke up with a start. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. She stumbled to her desk, her hands shaking as she reached for her notebook. Without hesitation, she began to draw. By morning, the storm had passed, but Emily's room was in disarray. Papers were scattered across the floor, each one filled with elaborate maps and symbols. In the center of it all was a single haunting phrase, written in perfect hieroglyphic script: "Return to the beginning." "It's a message," Emily said calmly over breakfast, holding up the paper. Her parents exchanged uneasy glances. "Emily, we can't just—" John began, but she cut him off. "You don't understand. If I don't go back, it won't stop. The dreams, the memories, they're pulling me there." Her certainty left no room for argument. A week later, they were on a plane back to Egypt, this time with a scholar named Dr. Ahmed, who specialized in ancient Egyptian history. Emily had insisted on his presence, claiming he would understand the symbols she had drawn. Dr. Ahmed was skeptical at first, but as Emily laid out her maps and notes, his demeanor shifted from polite curiosity to stunned silence. "This is impossible," he murmured, his fingers tracing the edges of one of her drawings. "These are symbols from an undiscovered tomb. No one alive should know this." Emily's response was calm, almost detached. "I'm not alive, not in the way you mean." Their second journey to the Giza Plateau felt different, heavier, as though an unseen force weighed on them. This time, Emily led the way with unwavering determination, her steps brisk and confident. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert sands. Emily stopped abruptly at a seemingly random spot, far from the well-trodden tourist paths. "It's here," she said, her voice steady. Dr. Ahmed frowned, glancing at his GPS. "There's nothing recorded in this location," he said. But Emily wasn't listening. She knelt down and began brushing away the sand with her hands. Within moments, the outline of a stone's surface began to emerge, a doorway, buried beneath the shifting dunes. "This is the beginning," Emily whispered. Her words sent chills down her parents' spines. With Dr. Ahmed's help, they managed to uncover the entrance. The doorway was inscribed with hieroglyphs that glowed faintly in the dim light of their torches. "This is a warning," Ahmed said gravely. "It says that those who enter must be prepared to face the truth." Emily didn't hesitate. "I'm ready," she said. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow tunnel that descended deep into the earth. The air was cool and heavy, carrying the faint scent of ancient stone and something else, something metallic, like blood. "We shouldn't go any further," John whispered, his voice trembling. But Emily pressed on, her parents and Dr. Ahmed reluctantly following. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its walls covered in glowing symbols. In the center of the room stood a raised platform, and atop it, a large, ornate mirror framed in gold. Emily approached the mirror slowly, her reflection staring back at her. But as she drew closer, the reflection changed. It was no longer her face, but that of a woman adorned in royal regalia, her eyes piercing and ancient. "It's you," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. The room grew colder as the reflection began to speak, its voice echoing like a distant wind. "You have returned to complete what was left undone." "You have returned?" The Queen's voice echoed again, her tone both commanding and sorrowful. "You carry the fragments of a life once lived, a purpose unfulfilled. Will you claim what was lost?" Emily took a shaky step forward. Her heart raced, but something deep inside her felt right. She wasn't just standing in front of a mirror. She was standing in front of herself, separated by the veil of time. "I'm ready," Emily whispered. The queen's reflection raised an elegant hand, and Emily instinctively mirrored the motion. As their fingers aligned, a pulse of energy surged through the room, sending a shockwave of golden light cascading across the walls. The symbols etched into the chamber began to glow brighter, their intricate patterns swirling like rivers of liquid fire. "You must choose," the queen said. "To awaken fully is to relinquish all that you are now. To step away is to remain incomplete, a shadow of what you were meant to be." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. Her parents and Dr. Ahmed watched in stunned silence, the weight of the moment rendering them powerless to intervene. "I don't want to lose them," Emily said, her voice trembling. "You will not lose them," the queen replied. "But they will see you as you truly are. Do you trust them to accept the truth?" Emily turned to look at her parents. Mary's eyes glistened with tears, and John gave a small, encouraging nod. Dr. Ahmed, though pale and visibly shaken, whispered, "You were meant for this." With renewed determination, Emily placed her palm firmly against the mirror. The surface rippled like water, and she felt herself being pulled forward. The chamber around her dissolved into a whirlwind of light and sound, and for a moment she was weightless, suspended between worlds. When the light subsided, Emily found herself standing in a different place, a sprawling throne room bathed in golden light. Massive pillars carved with intricate hieroglyphs reached up to a ceiling painted with stars. At the far end of the room, a grand throne stood empty, its surface glinting with gems. Emily's appearance had changed. Her modern clothes were gone, replaced by flowing white robes adorned with gold and turquoise jewelry. Her hair was braided and crowned with an intricate diadem. She looked down at her hands, which now bore delicate tattoos of ancient symbols that glowed faintly. The queen's voice echoed once more, but this time it came from within her. "You are whole now. You are the keeper of the veil, the bridge between worlds." Suddenly, Emily became aware of figures surrounding her. Shadows moved between the pillars, their forms indistinct but menacing. Whispers filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "They are the forgotten," the queen's voice warned. "Souls that have strayed from the path, bound to this place. They will test your resolve." Emily squared her shoulders, her fear giving way to an unshakable sense of purpose. "I'll face them," she said firmly. As the shadows began to converge on her, Emily raised her hands instinctively. The glowing tattoos on her skin pulsed with light, forming a protective barrier around her. The whispers turned into anguished cries as the shadows recoiled. "You must lead them to the light," the queen instructed. "Only then will they be free." With a deep breath, Emily extended her hands toward the shadows, her voice steady and commanding. "Follow me. Your time in darkness is over." One by one, the shadows hesitated, then moved toward her. The room filled with a soft, golden glow as the shadows began to transform, their forms becoming more human, their faces etched with relief and gratitude. When the last shadow had faded into the light, the throne room grew silent. Emily stood alone, the weight of her new role settling on her shoulders. "It is done," the queen's voice said, fading into silence. Emily turned to face the throne, which now bore an inscription in glowing hieroglyphs. "The keeper shall guide the lost." Her parents and Dr. Ahmed appeared beside her, their expressions a mix of awe and pride. "Emily?" Mary whispered, her voice shaking. Emily turned to face her mother, her eyes glowing faintly. "I'm still me," she said softly. "But I'm also more than that." The family embraced, their bond unbroken despite the transformation. Dr. Ahmed cleared his throat, his voice tinged with wonder. "This is only the beginning, isn't it?" Emily nodded. "Yes, and we're all part of it." Months passed, and life at the farmhouse seemed to return to normal, or so it appeared. Emily had embraced her new role, guiding lost souls and bridging worlds. Her parents watched with cautious awe, proud yet always a little on edge, waiting for what might come next. But not everything stayed in the light. One crisp autumn evening, Emily stood at the window, watching the horizon. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying something familiar. A voice. Soft, lingering. "You are not the only keeper," it whispered, barely audible but unmistakably real. Emily's eyes narrowed. She glanced at her reflection in the glass. For a split second, it wasn't her face staring back. It was the queen's. The same knowing eyes, the same sorrowful gaze. Then it was gone. Far away, in a distant city, another child sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing symbols on the walls. a trail of ancient power spreading once again. Emily knew her journey was far from over. Someone was coming, and this time, she wouldn't be the only one with a claim to the veil.